Now, please welcome Reverend Sara.
Good morning, CSA. Let's thank Sarah Medlicott. Wow. She just tore that up. Oh, man. Our own little Ricky Byers in the house. Yes. Hi. I am Sara Nichols, and my pronouns are she, hers. And I am thrilled to be with you this morning. How wonderful it is. I'm one of the staff ministers here at the Center for Spiritual Awareness, by the way. If you didn't know, I am. And you might not. Who knows? Listen, I want to tell you a little story about my friends Chuck and Debbie. A bunch of us were gathered together in the Adirondacks in New York State. And Chuck and Debbie were driving from Buffalo to join us in the Adirondacks. And Chuck talks a lot, and Debbie usually doesn't, unless she needs to correct Chuck, which is actually fairly often. And they were driving through these little small towns, winding, back highways, right, on the way to the Adirondacks. And Chuck had comments on each town. But then they got to a town, and Chuck said, "Oh, Debbie, this is the best town yet." The town's name was Minerva. And he said, "We've gotten there, Debbie. We've finally reached Minerva." And Debbie said, "Chuck," that's how Debbie talks, "Chuck, I don't think you have that right. I think it's Nirvana, not Minerva." And Chuck said, "Debbie, I think you might be right. We've only reached Minerva. Maybe we'll eventually get to Nirvana." And she said, "Chuck." So then they got to the Adirondacks, they got to the camping spot, and they told us this story, and I just was hysterical over it, and then forgot about it for a long time. And then I remembered. And realize that we'll just put aside the fact that Minerva is named after the goddess of wisdom and has all sorts of amazing properties. Just suspend your thoughts about that. In fact, suspend all thoughts. Just be here. But really, that is what it is, right? We want to be in a state of nirvana, but we're mostly in a state of Minerva. And what is Minerva? To me, Minerva is that part of life, which is most of it, unless you're in a spiritual practice, where it appears extremely real, which is where there is limitation, there is lack, there is shoulda, woulda, coulda, there is oh no, there is fear, there is doubt, there is worry, there's the to-do list, right? Which, speaking of which, why are any of you even here when you have that to-do list? My God, get busy. And there's that, right? And actually, I was recently reminded that scientists know that all lives in the left hemisphere of our brain. But we actually have two hemispheres. And the other one is the state of nirvana, is accessible through it. The part of us that is connected with all things, which was just referred to so well in Steve Marlowe's prayer. Connected to all things, all possibilities, all beyond time, beyond space, beyond expectation, beyond limits, beyond lack. And that's what we come here for, right, is to access the state of nirvana and not live in the state of Minerva. And there are so many spiritual tools that can move us from Minerva to Nirvana, and many of them are taught here, and many of you have practiced them. And that is not this talk. This talk is really about when it seems real, when the state of Minerva just seems so real and we're unable, and we don't have time to sign up, as you should, should. As I would suggest and invite you to, one of those beautiful love offering practitioner sessions. When I don't have time for that, when that's a couple weeks out, and I'm really right with my family or my coworkers, and there is an appearance that some people are very difficult to deal with. Does anybody ever have that appearance? You might not want to raise your hand depending on who you're with, but I still do. I still do have that appearance. Now listen, here at CSA, we teach that every interaction, and we do mean every, and that's why Reverend Rick always questions it, but every interaction is either a call for love or an expression of love. And yet, sometimes we don't know which way love is calling us, let's say. And it really appears that the interaction is difficult. Now, I'm just going to briefly tell you some of the ways you could move yourself more reliably from a state of Minerva to a state of Nirvana, and those I'm not going to cover again today. And that would be any kind of forgiveness work, fear to faith, Byron Katie's The Works, and working the 12 steps on anything, okay? So all of those will more reliably move us so that we don't have to believe the thoughts in our head and we don't have to believe. And more and more and more, I, as probably many of you, do not have to be sure that the people around me are the problem. But sometimes I do think that. And I certainly have thought that. Now, what works for me with difficult people are the following principles, and this we are going to get into. Hold my boundaries, don't say them. Or as one person from the first service came up to me and said, don't paint them in day glow. Sorry, Steve, I stole it. The other one is you may be right, and can you believe it? And change the subject. Those are all under the heading of don't show up for every fight that you're invited to. Another one is leave and scream. Rats will be rats, and this is really hard for me. So let's talk first about hold my boundaries, don't say them. My mother, during her early dementia, while she was still living on her own mostly, would call me 6 to 10 times a day and leave terrible messages if she didn't reach me, or just say terrible things if she did reach me. And they would often, the first thing out of her mouth would usually be, your problem is, or you need to do this to make me happy, or some variation thereof. And I recorded these and played these for advisors of mine, and that is really what she was saying. This wasn't just, really, in the state of Minerva, we can never be sure. And what we learn, unfortunately, in these rooms is that we create our experience. But that is the experience I created. Let's put it that way. And so my advisor said, well, how about you just call her once a week on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. And that's all. That's the only time you talk to her. And I said, oh, that sounds perfect. But then I made a huge mistake. I told her, Mom, I'm not going to be taking any of your other calls or listening to your messages. Why did I say that? And then I will call you Tuesdays at 2 p.m., and that will be our time. Well, she is the kind of person, maybe you've met one, where articulating a boundary is like waving a red flag at a bull. So this was became something just hell no on her part, right? That is not going to happen. She upped the number of phone calls to me. It was like, when they're trying to get the acceptance to Hogwarts to Harry Potter, just coming in every direction. She was leaving messages with my brothers to pass on to me. You name it. And it came to Tuesday at 2 p.m. and I called her and she wouldn't even take the call. She had her housemate say, she doesn't want to speak to you. She doesn't appreciate having one time a week. Well, that was my bottom with articulating, painting boundaries in Dayglow, right? No more. From then on, in our family, we had another boundary, which was she could come to the house once a week for dinner once she moved up here. And we did not say that. We just invited her once a week. The other invitations were declined. And, and the ways in which she tried to force herself on us that were not welcome were just gently declined. Okay, so hold boundaries, don't say them. The only thing about a boundary that's important is I hold it. And there's a whole series on boundaries by Cloud and Townsend that I highly recommend, two Christian ministers. All right, don't show up for every argument that you're invited to. And there's 3 ways I do that. One is change the subject. Change the subject. You may think that it's not subtle to change the subject, but if you change the subject, if I change the subject to anything at all that I can stand hearing from this person that they like to talk about, right? Not what I like to talk about, but what they like to talk about that I'm okay hearing. Like, how's your little dog? Or, oh, how's that garden of yours? Or what? Are you getting out walking? And do you like that? Are you taking those same walks? That kind of thing, right? And I will do that with people, and it doesn't matter, they don't have to have dementia for this to work, just so you know. People can be 100% on top of their game. I've done this with many politicians, by the way, and change the subject to something they want to talk about that I can stand hearing, and now they're right there. We're off that topic. We never had to address it. But in case the topic keeps coming, or in case you don't know what to change the subject to, have these 2 phrases handy. And by the way, obviously a lot of times these arguments can happen, or these invitations to arguments can happen around politics. And I will say there is a huge range of diversity in my family politically. In the previous presidential election, some of us were for Bernie Sanders, and there were others who were for Elizabeth Warren. So just a massive, massive spectrum. And yet we were still able to come up with arguments, so that was funny. But the phrases I would urge you to have handy there are, you may be right, and can you believe it? Those are that. And I literally have had these written on my wrist at times in family and work gatherings. So you may be right. You may be completely wrong. You may be completely but you may be right. And people do not question it. Even if you've said it a number of times, and even if they suspect they're being patronized, they still like it. Just like I will say that I have never met an elected official who didn't like to be flattered. And they know they're being flattered, but they still like it. And also ministers like to be flattered. All right. And the other one there is, can you believe it? Somebody's just told you the most insane conspiracy theory you've ever heard in your life, and that is a perfect thing to say. Can you believe it? That one was told to me by a comedian in New York, but he had great examples of how it worked. So I've used it. It really works. It doesn't mean I believe it. It doesn't mean I can believe that you believe it or that anyone believes it. But can you believe it? Leave and scream. That's another one. What is leaving? It can be so many different things, right? Going to the bathroom, taking a walk around the block, just, and we think, I think especially women think this, that we have to actually justify our leaving in some way and tell people why we're leaving. We don't. Have you ever noticed, I mean, I'm going to say this is mostly men, maybe just because my husband does this, but he doesn't feel the need to ever say where he's going or why he's leaving a room. He just does, right? And that's okay. The world is not going to come to an end if I don't explain why I'm leaving. I can leave. And scream, well, now that part is interesting. If you can go to your car and scream and no one can hear you, right? Ah! Really scream, that's fantastic. But you could also do it, as they say in the theater and singing, sotto voce. So you could go under your voice. So you can go into the bathroom and do this. I remember a counselor of mine was saying, what are you really thinking when you're so upset? What's in your head? And I said, well, what I'm really thinking? Yeah, what are you really thinking? What I'm really thinking is, shut the fuck up. And she said, well, then go in the bathroom and scream that. So I do that, go into the bathroom. Oh. And you wouldn't think that would be the most successful mantra for getting you to from a state of Minerva to a state of nirvana, but it actually works pretty good. So, leave and scream. Rats will be rats. We had a pet rat in our house. His name was Napoleon. My husband is not, he's an amazing, wonderful person with whom I am wildly in love. And he's not wild about animals, and I know that doesn't go over well here. And I have joked, not even really joked, that the only person I would ever leave him for is a dog. But so we had a rat for our kids, and Napoleon was in a cage, and he's up in the upstairs hallway next to sort of a counter banister. And one time I hung laundry that hadn't quite dried next to the cage. And a couple hours later, I came back, and my favorite sweater had been torn to shreds by Napoleon. We named him Napoleon, so obviously he's not going to respect boundaries. And I was really mad. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe he did that. And then I suddenly thought, he's a rat. Of course he's going to eat a sweater. And then I was not at all mad. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, there are lots of people that are rats that I expect to be different. And I keep hanging my emotional laundry next to them, and they keep tearing it to shreds. Why do I do that? Who really has made the mistake there? I expect rats not to be rats. So rats will be rats. And then my final point, and all of these really are about being loving to myself. I hope you understand that. But I remember, again, talking to an advisor and saying, I just hope my prayer today is that I can really show up as love for my mother, who was, by that time, moved up here in very advanced dementia. I would spend certain hours a week with her. And I was like, that I can show up as loving for her. And this advisor said, well, that's not the right thing to focus on. And I said, really? I want to show up as loving. And she's like, well, do you feel loving? And I go, no. And he goes, well, how about you show up as loving for yourself? And she said, I want you today, every time something happens where you're not feeling loving to your mom, put your hand on your chest and say, this is really hard for you. Again, under the breath to me, right? This is really hard for you, sweetie. God, this is hard. This is so hard. Any of you have something hard that you have to do anyway? This is really hard. And then do you feel that? The vibration, how far from Minerva to Nirvana just that statement can be? And now I can show up as love. I can't show up as love while I'm pretending that I want to scream. No, right? I have to be loving to myself in order to get there. So keep all of that on a little card, any of it that works for you. Hold my boundaries, don't say them, don't show up for fights. You may be right, can you believe it? Change the subject, leave and scream, rats will be rats, and this is really hard for me. Any of those, take them freely. You don't have to give me anything. Although if you do want to give me something, there's a little card that most of you would have received with my name on it, and I would love for you to sign up for my newsletter and receive a recorded meditation, and then you can unsubscribe right away. I won't even get a notice of it. I won't even know. You won't offend me. I don't want anyone to be subscribed who doesn't like to receive amazing spiritual wisdom every week. Now, how do we get from Minerva to Nirvana more reliably? Everything we teach here will help you with that. And I'm teaching Busting Loose from the Money Game, a phenomenal book that really is, it never uses the words Minerva or Nirvana, but it is 100% about that, about how do we get out of the illusion of limitation and lack in our bank accounts and the sense that it can never work and it doesn't line up and we keep making more money but somehow our expenses keep going up and it never, never ends, right? So there is no prerequisite for that class, but if you're thinking about taking foundations, take foundations. That's also, I believe Reverend Rick is leading it in January or early February, in January. So take that. But take Busting Loose if you've already had foundations maybe. And that is Tuesdays, starting the second Tuesday of January, and you'll get all the information from the newsletter and the center, but 7 Tuesdays from noon to 1:30 Pacific time, for those of you on the East Coast who are tuning in. And Busting Loose from the Money Game. And now I'm going to take this message into prayer, and in this prayer, I'm going to incorporate a process to allow the judgments that some of you may feel from other people to actually enrich you and benefit you. All right? Now, I may be the only person in this room that ever feels judged. Anybody else ever feel judged? So if you do, it's for you, and if it's not for you, just take notes for your cousin. So, I am an infinite being of light and love. Everyone in this room and everyone within the sound of my voice is an infinite being of light and love. I have access to all the power and the promise and the purpose of the one mind, and nothing can hurt me and nothing can harm me. And so this moment, I and anyone else who's willing to take a helping of this, lower my force field. I lowered my defenses. I cease using any part of my vital life energy to defend against anyone or anything. There is nothing that can hurt me. There is nothing that can harm me. It all passes through me. I am not a wall. It passes through me as an infinite being of light and love, and it returns to original source of light and love for the Great Mother to compost it. And as I lower my force field, just like in Star Trek, my power is available to get me where I plan to go. Captain, we can't do it. We can't hold it. We let the force field down and we zoom. More money, more time, more love. We zoom from the Minerva galaxy to the Nirvana galaxy. And we experience all the delights that are available to us, that is the whole reason we signed up as spiritual beings to come into this planet and be in this body. Thank you, Spirit. Thank you, Spirit. Thank you, Spirit. Thank you for the fact that my word spoken with passion and authority never comes back to me void, that as it is done in mind, it is done in body and spirit and reality. Capital R reality, the galaxy of nirvana. And I live there now, and so it is. Amen.
Spirit